On July 27, 1861, several miles from Devil's Gate, Wyoming, a 17-year-old girl by the name of Violet Clements was found wandering alone in the wilderness by some other settlers who were passing by. She was shoeless and her clothes were bloodied and tattered. Her face was also bruised, like she'd been severely beaten. When asked what had happened, she looked confused and would not speak. She was taken to Sweetwater, Wyoming, where she was relinquished to a group of soldiers who were stationed there. A week later, she told the soldier in charge the terrifying details of what had happened to her and her family over a span of 5 to 6 days. They wrote down her story, and the papers were passed down from generation to generation through a specific family, but were forgotten, only coming to light within the last few years. This is her story. It's been transcribed to modern day English. I don't even know where to begin. My entire family is gone, and I'll never see them again. I just want to die. My family started coming out here from Massachusetts a long time ago. I can't even remember now when we started. My father's dream was to have his own farm out west, away from any city, so he could live life the way he wanted. For most of our journey, we'd been with or at least seen other folks along the trail, but as we got closer to what I now know is called Devil's Gate, it seemed as if everyone suddenly disappeared. We decided to spend the night at the mouth of Devil's Gate as it was getting near dark. Mother cooked biscuits and gravy for us that night, then we all went to sleep as we were bushed from the long day's journey. I was sleeping peacefully when I was awakened to the sound of rustling. I opened my eyes to see a strange man against the light of the fire standing over my father. He was swinging what looked like the handle of an axe at his head. My face was then suddenly covered with some type of cloth, and I was hit really hard in the face with something. When I awoke and opened my eyes sometime later, I could see I'd been blindfolded. I was laying face down on the ground with my hands and feet tied so I couldn't move much. There was also something in my mouth that made it so I couldn't speak. As I lay there, I could hear the faint muffling sounds of other people around me, and I knew for sure it was my family. I thought about moving around to see if I could somehow tell if it was them, but I was too scared, so I just laid there, not moving. "Grab one of the smaller children and bring them here now," a man said in a calm voice from somewhere behind me. "Yes, father," a young man replied. My body stiffened as I now knew I was surrounded by my sweet family and something very bad was going to happen. I then heard footsteps approaching, then suddenly, stop. I could hear someone trying to scream and fight as they were dragged across the ground. I had 3 little sisters and 2 little brothers, with me being the eldest. I tried guessing which sibling it was as I pictured their sweet faces in my mind. I struggled to break my hands and feet free, but the bindings were too tight. A little while later, I heard the man say, "This one has the wrong kind of blood. You know what to do." "Yes, father," replied the young man again. I was scared out of my mind as I thought, what on earth does that mean? I then heard the muffled sounds of screaming. The screams were quickly cut off, then silence. I started crying as I knew whoever it was had most likely been killed. Footsteps approached us, and again the sounds of someone being dragged along the ground as they tried fighting back. Sometime later, I heard the man say, "This one has the blood we need. Take her to the room and tie her to the bed. We need to keep her alive as long as possible." "Yes, father," replied a girl this time, probably about my age judging by her voice. It went on like this, then it stopped for a while. My guess was a day or so. I was eventually given water, some food, and taken to the outhouse by the girl. She wouldn't say much, only give me instructions. Then when I was finished doing what I needed to do, she'd leave. I wanted to plead with her to let me go, but was too afraid to speak. I'd guessed a few more days went by before I heard the heavy footsteps of a man approach me, then suddenly stop. I was then picked up and thrown over his shoulder and taken somewhere. I was put down on a bed and tied to it. My blindfold was taken off as my eyes adjusted to the sun that was shining through the window to see a man standing before me. I was expecting to see a beast, but instead he looked normal, if not somewhat handsome. His eyes, though, it's as if they were dead, like he had no soul. He then pulled up a chair and sat down. "I'm sure you're wondering why you're here, and I'm going to tell you. We come from a long line of people who need a certain type of blood to survive, otherwise we perish. Every 3 months we must replenish our supply, lest we run out. Those who carry the blood we need are kept alive as long as possible to supply us with as much blood as we can get. We do this so it lessens the amount of people we must take and drain, as we do not wish to draw attention to us, he said. He then grabbed a knife from a sheath he had on his belt, untied my hand, and made a small cut on my wrist. He put my wrist to his nose, smelling it for a bit, before gently laying my arm back down on the bed and tying my hand back up. You have the blood type we need. We will begin draining you later tonight, he said as he got up and left the room. I said nothing as I started weeping. I was scared to death knowing I was going to die. The thought of my siblings going through this also brought tears to my eyes. Later that night, the man and the girl I'd guessed to be around my age came into the room I was in. They were silent as the man sat down on the chair. The girl kneeled down next to him, holding an empty pitcher. I looked straight at her, but she would not look back at me. The man untied my arm, grabbed it, and lifted it into the air like he was looking for something. He then looked down at the girl and nodded to her. She nodded back as she grabbed my hand, putting it into the pitcher. He then made a deep cut on my wrist as I squirmed and murmured out in pain. I did my best not to scream, as I'd figured it'd just make them angry. I laid there thinking I was going to die, and there was nothing I could do about it. So I closed my eyes, fully expecting not to wake up. Sometime later, the man said, "That's enough for today. Feed and water her so she gains her strength back. We need to get as much as we can from her." The girl said nothing as the man got up, grabbed the pitcher of blood, then left the room. The girl wrapped my wrist tightly with some cloth, then blindfolded me. She untied my other arm and had me sit up. She then gave me some food and water and tied me back up before she left. The next thing I remember was waking up and still laying on the bed, but my hands and feet were not tied anymore. I sat up looking around, expecting to see someone, but there was no one around I could see, as the moonlight lit up the room I was in. That was the first time I thought I might actually have a chance at escaping and going to get help. I quietly slid off the bed and walked over to the window. I looked around as I put my hands up to it, trying to open it. It would not budge. Rather than continue trying to open it and making noise, I decided to try and find a way out, so I started walking in the direction I thought might be the way out. I stumbled along in the dark as I thought about trying to find my family, but I was too frightened to do so. The further I got, the darker it became. I couldn't see where I was going. It was confusing, and I hit what I'm guessing was a wall. Right then, someone behind me whispered, "Where are you going?" My body tensed up as fear shot through me. What should I do? I thought. Footsteps then started coming towards me. Without thinking, I started moving as fast as I could, trying to find a way out as I kept running into things. I finally spotted what looked like the light of the moon coming through a crack of a door. I moved as fast as I could towards it. Once there, I fumbled to find the handle. The footsteps got louder and closer when I finally found the handle. I quickly grabbed it and flung the door open. I didn't hesitate running outside. Even with everything that had happened, I remember thinking how lucky I was the moon was shining, because I might not have made it out. As I ran, I looked over my shoulder at the house as a man appeared at the door and started running after me. I let out a scream as I ran, not knowing where I was going. I didn't care though. I just knew I needed to get as far away as possible. I ran for a ways until I tripped on a rock and was sent tumbling down a steep hill. I woke up the following morning on the bank of a river. My entire body, especially my face, hurt something awful as I moved about and tried sitting up. It took me a while to gain some strength before I could think clearly enough about what I should do. I had no idea where I was, only that I was in the middle of nowhere. The only thing I could think of was rescuing my family. Nothing else mattered at that point. I figured I might be able to trace my steps back to the house, but knew I needed to get up high to get a look of the land first. This is something my father always did when he wasn't sure which way to go. After getting a long drink from the river, I decided to hike back up the hill I'd tumbled down. It took me some time to make it back to the top as I was exhausted and not feeling well. When I made it, I stood there for a bit looking around and noticed another large hill to my left that was off a ways. I couldn't see much in front of me because of the trees and bushes, and didn't want to start walking and end up back at the house. I decided to go to the large hill and climb it to see what I could see. Once I reached the base of the hill, it took me quite a while to get to the top. I couldn't remember the last time I'd eaten, and I was getting really weak. By the time I reached the top, the sun was starting to set, and I knew I'd most likely end up spending the night up there. I sat down on a rock and started looking around when I quickly noticed a house that was tucked away in some thick trees in front of me. I was surprised and uneasy to see it was not too far away from where I was at. I was worried I might get seen, so I got off the rock and lay down on the ground, but to where I could still see the house. I laid there staring at the house as darkness settled in. Right as it got dark, I heard someone cry out, "No, no, no, please." Then the most horrific shrieking I'd ever heard started. The shrieking seemed to go on forever as I laid there crying, because I recognized who it was. It was my family. Part of me wanted to run down there and try and save them, but I was just too scared and knew I'd be next if I did. So I did. Nothing. A while later, a big bonfire was made outside the house, and I counted 6 people standing around the fire holding hands. To me, it looked like they were praying, except their heads were tilted back, with their mouths wide open. It was very strange and frightening. I fell asleep sometime during the night and was awakened to the sun hitting my face. I immediately looked down at the house and could see the fire was still smoldering, but there was no one I could see. I made the decision I needed to get help, so I started hiking down off the hill in the opposite direction of the house. I wandered in the wilderness before I was found by the family that brought me here. I know I'll never see my family again. After telling the soldiers her story, they quickly formed a search party to go back to Devil's Gate to find the house. When the soldiers found the house, the family that had kidnapped Violet's family was gone. They searched the premises, and what they found left them shocked and dismayed. They did in fact find Violet's family members. Some of the bodies were intact, having only been drained of their blood, but some had been dismembered and eaten, from what the soldiers could tell. They searched for clues that might help them find out who did it, but found nothing, other than something that had been carved on the wall in the home that read, Sanguis. It was rumored Violet ended up marrying one of the soldiers and spent her life in Wyoming raising a family. For more scary horror stories, please subscribe.